The Grand Hotel's marble lobby bustled with the usual afternoon activity. Business travelers hurried toward the elevators while tourists gathered near the reception desk, checking in with tired smiles after long flights. Nobody paid much attention to the old grand piano sitting in the corner near the tall windows. It had been there for years, mostly serving as an expensive decoration that management occasionally had tuned but rarely heard anyone play. That Tuesday afternoon started like any other. The receptionist was helping a confused elderly couple find their room number. A bellhop pushed a cart stacked high with designer luggage toward the elevator. The revolving doors kept spinning as people came and went. Then a man walked in who didn't quite fit the usual pattern of guests. He looked to be in his 60s, wearing a simple gray jacket that had seen better days. His jeans were faded and his shoes were scuffed from years of walking. A worn backpack hung from one shoulder, and his silver hair needed a trim. The receptionist barely glanced at him, assuming he was perhaps lost or looking for directions to somewhere else. He didn't approach the desk. Instead, he walked slowly across the polished floor, his eyes fixed on the piano. Without hesitation or asking permission, the man sat down on the bench. He placed his backpack carefully on the floor beside him and flexed his fingers slowly as if waking them from a long sleep. A few people nearby noticed him but quickly returned to their conversations. It wasn't unusual for hotel guests to occasionally try out the piano, usually playing a few clumsy notes before giving up. But when this man's fingers touched the keys, something extraordinary happened. The first notes that rang out were so pure and clear that they seemed to slice through the ambient noise of the lobby like a bell cutting through fog. Several heads turned immediately. The melody he began to play was hauntingly beautiful, something classical that most people couldn't name but felt deep in their chests. His hands moved across the keyboard with astonishing grace. Each note flowed into the next with perfect timing and emotion. It wasn't just technically perfect playing. There was something more, something that made people stop whatever they were doing and listen. The businessman who had been typing urgently on his laptop paused mid-email. The mother trying to calm her crying toddler found that her child had suddenly gone quiet, mesmerized by the sound. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered around the piano. People stood in a loose semicircle, afraid to get too close and break whatever spell was being cast. The man played with his eyes half closed, completely absorbed in the music. His weathered face showed deep concentration, but also something else: joy, sadness, and memory all mixed together. His fingers danced effortlessly across the keys, moving from soft, delicate passages to powerful, sweeping crescendos that made the crystal chandelier above seem to shimmer in response. The hotel staff began to notice the commotion. A young waiter carrying a tray of drinks stopped in his tracks, balancing his load while straining to see who was playing. The manager stepped out of her office, drawn by the unusual gathering in the lobby. She had worked at the hotel for 15 years and had never seen guests so captivated by anything. People were pulling out their phones, recording the performance, their faces lit with wonder and disbelief. The piece the man was playing seemed endless, flowing from one movement to another without pause. It was Rachmaninoff, someone in the crowd whispered, though others debated whether it might be Chopin or perhaps Liszt. Whatever it was being played at a level that belonged in concert halls, not hotel lobbies. The man's posture was perfect despite his casual clothing. Every movement was deliberate and practiced, the result of countless hours of dedication. More people continued to gather. Guests came down from their rooms after hearing the music through the old building's walls and wondering what was happening. The lobby, usually a place people passed through quickly, had transformed into an impromptu concert hall. Even the jaded front desk staff had abandoned their posts to watch. The security guard stood with his mouth slightly open, his usual stern expression replaced with one of amazement. As the man played, stories began to circulate among the watchers. One woman was certain she had seen him playing on the street corner downtown just yesterday, his worn keyboard case open for donations. Another guest insisted he looked familiar, like someone famous she couldn't quite place. An older gentleman claimed the way he played reminded him of recordings he had heard decades ago. Everyone had theories, but nobody had answers. The music swelled to a powerful climax, the man's fingers striking the keys with controlled force that sent waves of sound rolling through the space. Then just as suddenly it softened again, becoming gentle and reflective. Some people in the audience had tears in their eyes. Others stood frozen, afraid that any movement might end this unexpected gift they were receiving. The hotel manager pulled out her phone and quickly searched online, trying to figure out if they had a celebrity pianist staying with them that she somehow didn't know about. But the man wasn't listed on their guest registry. He hadn't checked in. He appeared to be just someone who had walked in from the street, sat down and started playing music that belonged in the world's finest venues. Time seemed to slow down in that lobby. Outside, cars honked and sirens wailed in the distance, but inside, there was only the piano and the mysterious man who played it with such profound skill and emotion. Nobody wanted the moment to end. Nobody wanted to break the spell by asking questions or demanding explanations. For now, they were content to simply stand there and witness something truly remarkable happening in the most ordinary of places. The mysterious pianist continued playing for nearly 40 minutes without stopping. His repertoire seemed endless, moving seamlessly from one classical masterpiece to another. By now, the crowd had grown to over 50 people, with more arriving every minute. Some stood on tiptoes at the back, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the man whose hands were creating such magic. Among the audience was a music professor from the nearby university, who had stopped by the hotel to meet a colleague for coffee. Professor Catherine Mills had taught piano for 30 years and had heard countless performances by students and professionals alike. As she listened to this stranger play, her trained ear picked up nuances that left her speechless. The technique was flawless, but more impressive was the interpretation. This wasn't someone simply playing notes on a page. This was someone who understood the soul of the music, who could communicate the composer's deepest intentions through his fingertips. She edged closer through the crowd, studying the man's hands and posture carefully. Something nagged at the back of her mind. The way he held his wrists, the particular phrasing he used, the subtle dynamics he employed. It all seemed familiar somehow. She pulled out her phone and began recording, though dozens of others were already doing the same. Within minutes, videos of the performance were being uploaded to social media, spreading rapidly across platforms. The hotel manager, Sandra Chen, finally approached the edge of the crowd with a security guard. Her initial plan had been to politely ask the man to stop, as hotel policy technically didn't allow unauthorized performances. But seeing the captivated faces of her guests, hearing the extraordinary music filling her lobby, she hesitated. This was clearly something special, and the last thing she wanted was to be remembered as the person who shut down a magical moment. Instead, she simply stood and listened, making a mental note to speak with him after he finished. Meanwhile, across town, a retired music critic named David Feinstein was browsing social media when a video appeared in his feed. A friend had shared it with the caption, "Amazing pianist playing at the Grand Hotel right now." David almost scrolled past it. The internet was full of videos claiming someone was amazing, and most were merely competent at best. But something made him tap the play button. Within seconds, he sat upright in his chair, turning up the volume on his phone. He replayed the video, then played it again, his brow furrowed in concentration. That sound, that particular touch on the keys, the way the phrases breathed and sang, it couldn't be. But it was impossible. The person he was thinking of hadn't been seen in public for over 15 years. Most people assumed he was dead or had retired to some remote corner of the world, never to perform again. David's hands trembled slightly as he grabbed his car keys and rushed toward the door. The Grand Hotel was only a 20-minute drive away. He had to see this with his own eyes, had to know if his decades of experience and his memory were playing tricks on him, or if the impossible was actually happening. Back at the hotel, the mysterious pianist transitioned into a piece that made Professor Mills gasp audibly. It was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the classical repertoire, but he wasn't just playing it. He was making the piano sing in ways she had only heard on rare, precious recordings. The speed was breathtaking, yet every note rang clear and distinct. His left hand created a rumbling foundation while his right hand flew across the high keys with the lightness of birds in flight. A teenage girl in the crowd started crying. She played piano herself and had struggled with this very piece for months, never quite getting it right. Seeing it performed with such mastery, such apparent ease, was both inspiring and overwhelming. Her mother put an arm around her shoulders, tears in her own eyes as well. The man's gray jacket had fallen open slightly, revealing an old t-shirt underneath with faded text that nobody could quite read. His backpack sat forgotten on the floor beside the bench. He seemed completely unaware of the crowd, lost in the world of the music. Sweat had begun to form on his forehead from the physical exertion of the playing, but his concentration never wavered. Then something happened that would later fuel endless speculation and debate. As he finished the Beethoven piece and transitioned into the next, an elderly woman at the front of the crowd suddenly covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes went wide with recognition. She grabbed her husband's arm so hard that he winced, pulling him down so she could whisper urgently in his ear. He looked skeptical at first, shaking his head, but as he listened more carefully and studied the pianist's profile, his expression changed to one of shock. The couple began whispering to the people standing near them. The news, whatever it was, spread through the crowd like ripples on water. Soon half the audience was murmuring to each other, pulling out phones to search for something, comparing images on their screens to the man at the piano. The energy in the room shifted from simple appreciation to electric excitement mixed with disbelief. Professor Mills finally managed to get close enough to see the man's face clearly. Her heart skipped a beat. She had that same photograph on the wall of her office, a famous image from decades ago, but that was impossible. That person had vanished from the public eye long ago, had become almost a myth in the classical music world. Yet here he was, or someone who looked remarkably like him, playing in a hotel lobby as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sandra Chen noticed the change in the crowd's demeanor. People were no longer just listening peacefully. They were excited, agitated, whispering urgently to each other and pointing at their phones. Something significant was happening. Something beyond just appreciating beautiful music. She made her way back to the front desk and pulled up the hotel's security camera footage on her computer, rewinding to when the man had first entered. She took a screenshot of his face and ran it through a reverse image search online. What came up made her lean back in her chair, her mouth falling open in astonishment. David Feinstein's car screeched into the hotel parking lot. He abandoned it in a spot marked for loading only and rushed through the revolving doors. The sound of piano music immediately confirmed what he had feared and hoped in equal measure. That distinctive touch, the particular way the notes sang and connected, belonged to only one person he had ever heard. He pushed through the crowd as politely as possible, earning annoyed looks from people who had been there longer. When he finally got close enough to see the pianist's profile clearly, his legs went weak. He had to grab onto someone's shoulder to steady himself. The man apologized, but David barely heard him. His entire focus was on the figure at the piano, a figure he had last seen in person at Carnegie Hall in December of 2009. It's really him, David whispered to himself. Michael Sterling. The name meant nothing to the younger people in the crowd, but for anyone over 40 who had any interest in classical music, it was legendary. Michael Sterling had been hailed as the greatest pianist of his generation, perhaps one of the greatest of all time. His recordings had won every major award. His concerts sold out within hours. Critics ran out of superlatives to describe his performances. He had been at the absolute peak of his career, only 47 years old, with decades of brilliance still ahead of him. Then, without warning or explanation, he had disappeared. After a triumphant performance in New York City, Michael Sterling had simply vanished from public life. Concerts were canceled. Recording contracts went unfulfilled. His agent released a brief statement saying that Mr. Sterling was taking time for personal matters and would not be performing for the foreseeable future. That foreseeable future had stretched into 16 years of silence. Speculation had run wild in the music world. Some said he had suffered a nervous breakdown from the pressure of constant perfection. Others claimed he had developed arthritis or some other condition that made playing impossible. Darker rumors suggested addiction or financial ruin. A few people insisted they had spotted him living as a recluse in various remote locations, but none of these sightings were ever confirmed. Gradually, Michael Sterling became a ghost story, a cautionary tale, a mystery that would never be solved. Yet here he was, in a hotel lobby, playing for free for anyone who happened to walk by. David's mind raced. This was the story of a lifetime. As one of the most respected music critics in the country, he knew that confirming Michael Sterling's whereabouts would be international news. But something made him hesitate. The man was playing with such pure joy, such freedom, completely unburdened by expectations or judgment. To expose him, To bring the weight of the world's attention crashing down on him again felt like a kind of cruelty. Meanwhile, Professor Mills had reached the same conclusion about the pianist's identity. She stood frozen, torn between professional excitement and human compassion. Several other people in the crowd had figured it out as well. Phones were out, searches were being conducted, and confirmation was spreading person to person like wildfire. Yet everyone seemed bound by an unspoken agreement. Nobody called out his name. Nobody rushed forward to interrupt him. They all seemed to understand instinctively that this moment was precious and fragile, and that breaking it would be unforgivable. Michael Sterling continued playing, oblivious to the growing recognition around him. He had moved into a jazz improvisation, showing yet another facet of his incredible talent. His fingers danced across the keys with playful spontaneity, creating melodies that had never been played before and would never be played exactly the same way again. He smiled slightly as he played, lost in the creative flow. In the back of the crowd, a young journalist named Emma Rodriguez had joined the audience after receiving a frantic text from her roommate, who worked at the hotel. Emma covered local entertainment news and was always looking for interesting stories. She had been filming for several minutes before checking her Twitter feed and seeing the speculation about who this man might be. When she realized the potential magnitude of what was happening, her journalistic instincts went into overdrive. She began conducting quick interviews with people in the crowd, keeping her voice low so as not to disturb the performance. An older couple confirmed they were certain this was Michael Sterling, based on seeing him perform live in Boston back in 2007. A music student pulled up old concert photos on her phone, comparing them to the man at the piano. The resemblance was unmistakable, though age and a much simpler lifestyle had changed him significantly. Sandra Chen, the hotel manager, faced a dilemma. She now knew who was playing piano in her lobby, and she understood the implications. Her hotel was about to become famous, for better or worse. She needed to make decisions about security, about privacy, about how to handle the situation once the performance ended. But she also felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility to protect this man, whoever he was, whatever his reasons for disappearing had been. She instructed her security team to form a discreet perimeter, not to keep people away from the performance, but to be ready to help manage the situation if things got out of control. She also made a quiet call to the hotel owner, knowing this was beyond her authority to handle alone. Michael finished his jazz improvisation and paused for a moment, his hands resting on the keys. The crowd held its collective breath, wondering if the performance was over. Then he began playing again, something soft and melancholy, a piece many recognized as Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a perfect choice for the late afternoon light filtering through the hotel's tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. As he played, a woman in her 30s managed to push close to the piano. She had tears streaming down her face, though she seemed unaware of them. She had been 11 years old when her mother took her to see Michael Sterling perform in Chicago. That concert had inspired her to dedicate her life to music. She had become a professional violinist, and though she had never reached the heights of fame, she made her living doing what she loved. She had always wanted to thank him for that inspiration, never imagining she would get the chance. David Feinstein watched her crying and felt his own eyes burning. He thought about all the articles he had written over the years speculating about Michael Sterling's disappearance, the theories and investigations that had gone nowhere. Now he had his answer, or at least part of it. Michael Sterling had walked away from everything because he wanted to. He had chosen simplicity over fame, anonymity over adulation. He had chosen to play piano when and where he wanted, for no reason other than the joy of making music. The question was, what happened next? The Chopin Nocturne came to its gentle conclusion, the final notes hanging in the air like the last stars before dawn. Michael Sterling lifted his hands from the keys and sat still for a moment, his head bowed slightly as if in prayer or meditation. The lobby remained absolutely silent. Nobody clapped. Nobody moved. It felt as though the entire building was holding its breath. Then Michael stood up slowly, his joints stiff from sitting for nearly an hour. He reached down for his backpack, slinging it over one shoulder in a practiced motion. As he turned to face the crowd for the first time, his eyes widened slightly. He had been so absorbed in the music that he genuinely hadn't realized how many people had gathered. For a brief moment, something flickered across his face that might have been panic or fear, but it passed quickly, replaced by a gentle, tired smile. "Thank you for listening," he said quietly, his voice rusty from disuse, barely audible to anyone beyond the first few rows. "It's been a while since I played for anyone." He started walking toward the exit, but the crowd didn't part easily. People pressed closer, still hesitant to speak but desperate to be near him, to preserve the magic of the moment just a little longer. Michael moved through them patiently, nodding politely, his eyes down. He clearly wanted to leave, but he wasn't pushing anyone or being rude about it. That's when David Feinstein made his decision. He stepped directly into Michael's path, blocking his way to the door. Their eyes met, and recognition flashed immediately across Michael's face. Of course he would remember David. They had known each other years ago, had done interviews, had shared meals after concerts. David had written some of the most glowing reviews of Michael's career. "Hello, David," Michael said softly, resignation in his voice. "I suppose it was too much to hope that nobody would recognize me." "You're really just going to walk away again?" David asked, not accusatory but genuinely curious. "After playing like that, after reminding everyone what the world lost when you disappeared?" Michael's expression grew sad. "The world lost nothing. Music is still everywhere. Better pianists than me are performing every night. The world moved on just fine without Michael Sterling. But we didn't move on," interrupted Professor Mills, who had pushed forward to join them. "Those of us who heard you, who were changed by your music, we never forgot. We never stopped wondering what happened, if you were okay, if you might come back someday." More people gathered around them now, emboldened by David and Catherine speaking up. The circle grew tighter, though not threatening. They were like pilgrims who had stumbled upon a prophet and couldn't let him vanish again without understanding why he had left in the first place. Michael looked around at all the faces, young and old, hopeful and desperate. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind, making a calculation about the cost of speaking versus the cost of running. Finally, he sighed deeply and let his backpack slide off his shoulder to the floor. "Could someone get me some water?" he asked. Sandra Chen practically sprinted to the hotel bar and returned with a glass of ice water. Michael drank half of it in one long swallow, then set the glass down on the piano's closed lid. He sat back down on the bench, and the crowd arranged itself in a semicircle around him, everyone sitting on the floor like children at story time. The whole scene had a surreal quality. This legendary figure in his worn jacket surrounded by admirers in a marble lobby that had become an impromptu confessional. "I didn't plan to disappear," Michael began, his voice stronger now. "I mean, I did, but not the way everyone thought. It wasn't a breakdown or an addiction or any of the dramatic stories people told. It was actually much simpler and much harder to explain." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Emma Rodriguez had her phone out recording, but she held it low and discreet, not wanting to spook him. "I was tired," Michael continued. "Not physically tired, though that too. I was tired of the pressure to be perfect. Tired of the same questions in every interview. Tired of the politics of the music world, the competitions between performers, the critics who could make or break careers with a few words. I was tired of living in hotels and airports. Tired of playing the same pieces over and over because audiences wanted to hear the greatest hits. I had become a machine that produced excellence. And somewhere along the way, I forgot why I fell in love with music in the first place." The crowd listened in rapt silence. This was not what anyone had expected to hear. "After that last concert in New York, I sat in my dressing room for 3 hours," Michael said. "Everyone else had gone home. The hall was empty. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had simply sat at a piano and played whatever I wanted, with no one listening, no one judging, no recording being made for posterity. I had become so focused on being the best that I had forgotten to simply be myself." He picked up the water glass and took another sip, his hands shaking slightly. "So I left. I cashed out what I could, gave most of my money away to music education programs, and I walked away from all of it. I've spent the last 16 years living very simply, working odd jobs when I needed money, staying in cheap motels and shelters when necessary. And I played piano whenever I found one, whenever the mood struck me, with no pressure and no expectations." A woman in the crowd raised her hand tentatively, as if in school. Michael smiled and nodded at her. "But weren't you miserable?" she asked. "Living like that after having everything?" "That's the thing," Michael replied. I wasn't miserable at all. I was happier than I had been in decades. I played on street corners for spare change. I played in community centers for senior citizens. I played in church basements for recovery groups. And every single time I played because I wanted to, because the music moved through me. Not because a contract obligated me to, or because critics would review my interpretation. David Feinstein spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. But Michael, your gift, your talent, you've been hiding it from the world. Don't you feel like you had a responsibility to share it? Michael's expression hardened slightly. That's exactly the thinking that drove me away, David. This idea that my ability belonged to the world, that I owed something to audiences and institutions. But my ability belongs to me, and I've been sharing it, just not in concert halls. I've shared it with people who would never buy a ticket to Carnegie Hall, who would never own my recordings. I've shared it with people who needed beauty in their lives but couldn't afford the price of admission to the world I used to inhabit. The words hung in the air, challenging decades of assumptions about art and obligation and the relationship between gift and burden. The silence that followed Michael's words was heavy with contemplation. Many in the crowd looked uncomfortable, forced to reconsider their assumptions about talent and duty. Professor Mills found herself questioning decades of teaching students that they had an obligation to pursue excellence and share their gifts with the world. What if that pressure was exactly what destroyed artists rather than elevated them? A young man in his 20s wearing a college sweatshirt spoke up nervously. I'm studying piano at the conservatory downtown. Everyone there talks about you like you're a legend, like you're what we should all aspire to be. Are you saying we shouldn't want that kind of success? Michael shook his head gently. I'm not saying that at all. If the spotlight brings you joy, if performing on the world's greatest stages fulfills you, then pursue it with everything you have. But if you find yourself dreading performances, if you're playing for approval rather than for love of the music itself, then it's okay to choose a different path. Success doesn't have to look the same for everyone. Emma Rodriguez lowered her phone for a moment, struck by a thought. She raised her voice slightly to be heard. Mr. Sterling, what made you sit down and play today? After 16 years of staying hidden, why risk exposure like this? Michael looked at her thoughtfully. I didn't think about it being a risk, honestly. I was walking past the hotel, heard some arguing inside, a lot of stress and anger in people's voices, and I saw the piano through the window. It looked lonely, unused. I thought maybe some music might help, might calm things down a bit. I used to do that sometimes back when I was touring, find quiet moments before shows to play in empty halls. It reminded me why I started playing in the first place. He smiled, a genuine expression that made him look younger despite his aged appearance. And I'll be honest, it felt good. Playing for all of you, seeing your faces, feeling the music connect with people again. I've missed that more than I wanted to admit to myself. Sandra Chin, who had been standing at the edge of the gathering, stepped forward. Mr. Sterling, I don't want to pressure you, but would you consider playing here again? Maybe regularly? We could set up scheduled times. Not performances exactly, just opportunities for you to play if you wanted to. No pressure, no obligations, just an open invitation. The crowd murmured in approval, many people nodding enthusiastically. But Michael looked uncertain. That's very kind of you, but schedules and commitments, even voluntary ones, they have a way of becoming obligations. I'd worry that it would start to feel like work again. What if we didn't schedule it? Suggested a middle-aged woman who identified herself as a therapist. What if you just knew the piano was here, always available, and you could come play whenever you felt moved to? No announcements, no expectations, just an open door. Michael considered this, absently running his fingers along the piano's edge. That might work. Though today has shown me that word spreads fast. I'm not sure how long it would take before crowds were showing up hoping to see me, turning it into exactly what I was trying to avoid. David Feinstein cleared his throat. Michael, I need to be honest with you. Videos of your performance today are already spreading across the internet. By tomorrow morning, the world is going to know you're alive and that you've resurfaced. There will be reporters, agents, record labels, all of them trying to find you. Your anonymity is essentially over whether you like it or not. The words seemed to land on Michael like a physical weight. His shoulders sagged slightly, and for a moment he looked very old and very tired. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, guilty about their role in his exposure even though each individual had only wanted to capture and share something beautiful. I suppose I knew this might happen eventually, Michael said quietly. You can only hide for so long in a world where everyone has a camera in their pocket. I just hoped I'd have more time. A teenage girl who had been crying earlier spoke up, her voice trembling. Mr. Sterling, I just want to say thank you. I've been studying piano for 8 years, and sometimes I hate it because my parents push so hard and my teacher is so critical. But listening to you today reminded me why I started. You made it look joyful, like you were playing for yourself even though we were all watching. That's what I want to find again. Michael's expression softened. He reached out and took the girl's hand gently. Then find it. Don't let anyone, including me, tell you how your relationship with music should look. If you need to step back, step back. If you need to push forward, push forward. But make sure you're doing it for yourself, not for everyone else's expectations. Professor Mills interjected with a practical concern. Michael, if word is going to get out anyway, perhaps you should consider controlling the narrative. You could do an interview, explain things on your own terms before the tabloids and speculators twist your story into something sensational. Michael laughed, but it was bitter. And who would I do this interview with, Catherine? Someone who would respect my boundaries, or someone who would turn my life into entertainment, who would pressure me to perform again, to make a comeback, to feed the celebrity machine I walked away from. David stepped forward again. Let me do it. You know me. You know I'll be fair. Write your own story, Michael. Tell people why you left and why you won't be coming back to that world. At least then you'll have some control over the message. Michael studied his old acquaintance for a long moment. There was history between them, years of mutual respect and understanding. No recordings of me playing, he said finally. You can write about what happened today, about why I left, about where I've been. But I won't become a performing monkey again. No album deals, no comeback concerts, no media circus. Just words explaining my choice. Agreed, David said immediately, relief flooding his features. The crowd began to disperse slowly, reluctantly, knowing that something special had occurred, but that it was time to let the man have some space. Many people approached Michael as they left, shaking his hand or thanking him quietly. Several pressed money into his hands despite his protests, treating him as they would any street musician who had given them an unexpected gift. Emma Rodriguez hung back, waiting until most people had left. She approached Michael with her press credentials visible. Mr. Sterling, I'm a local reporter. I recorded some of your performance today before I knew who you were. I want you to know that I'm going to sit on that footage. I won't release it, won't sell it, won't do anything with it without your permission. What you said about choosing your own path, about music belonging to you, that resonated with me. You have my word. Michael looked surprised, then genuinely moved. Thank you. That means more than you might realize. As the lobby finally cleared, only Sandra Chen, David Feinstein, and Michael remained. The late afternoon had shifted to early evening, and the quality of light through the windows had changed from gold to purple. The hotel would soon be filling up with guests returning from dinner, and the moment of magic would be fully in the past. Sandra Chen ordered coffee and sandwiches from the hotel kitchen, insisting that Michael eat something before they talked further. He accepted gratefully, admitting he hadn't eaten since breakfast. They sat in a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the piano but still within sight of it as if it were a fourth member of their conversation. Where have you been staying? Sandra asked gently, her manager instincts telling her that someone in worn clothing carrying only a backpack probably didn't have stable housing. Michael hesitated, then shrugged. Different places. I spent a few years out west, working in restaurants and playing in bars. Did some time in the Southwest, even lived in Mexico for a while. The last 6 months I've been back in this area, mostly staying at a shelter downtown or sleeping rough when the weather's decent. It's not as dramatic as it sounds. I've met interesting people, heard stories I never would have encountered in my old life. David, who had been typing notes on his laptop, looked up sharply. Michael, you've been homeless. One of the greatest pianists alive has been sleeping in shelters. Don't make it sound tragic, Michael said firmly. I chose this. I have skills, I could get work if I wanted it. But work means commitments, means staying in one place, means getting pulled back into the world of obligations and expectations. I've preferred to keep things simple, to stay light, to be able to walk away whenever I need to. Sandra exchanged a glance with David. There was clearly something more complex going on here than just a famous person who wanted privacy. Michael's lifestyle went beyond avoiding the spotlight. It bordered on self-imposed exile, a deliberate rejection not just of fame but of stability itself. Are you running from something? Sandra asked carefully. Or are you punishing yourself for something? The question hung in the air. Michael put down his sandwich, no longer hungry. For a long moment he stared at his hands, those remarkable hands that had brought so much beauty into the world. My wife, Rebecca, died in a car accident 3 months before I disappeared, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. We'd been married for 18 years. She was the reason I could handle the pressure of performing, the reason I stayed grounded. She reminded me why music mattered, why it was worth sharing despite all the stress and criticism. David set down his laptop, giving Michael his full attention. This part of the story had never been public. Michael had always been intensely private about his personal life. After she died, I tried to keep going. Michael continued. I performed through my grief because that's what professionals do. The New York concert, the one everyone remembers as my last performance, I played that concert 2 days after scattering her ashes. People said it was the most emotionally powerful thing I'd ever done, that I'd reached new heights as an artist. His voice cracked slightly. They were praising me for my pain. They loved my music more because I was broken. And I realized that if I stayed in that world, everyone would expect me to keep performing at that level of raw emotion. They'd want me to bleed for them every time I sat at a piano. So I left, I disappeared, and I've been trying to figure out who I am without her. Without the career we built together, without any of it. Sandra reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Tears were running down her cheeks, and she didn't bother to hide them. I'm so sorry. I can't imagine that kind of loss. David's professional demeanor had completely dissolved. This wasn't just a story anymore. This was a human being who had been in unimaginable pain, trying to survive in the only way he knew how. Michael, have you talked to anyone about this? A therapist, a counselor, anyone? Michael smiled sadly. I've talked to God or whoever's listening when I pray. I've talked to Rebecca in my head, though I know she's not really there. And I've talked through my music. Every time I sit at a piano, it's a conversation with her, with myself, with the universe. That's been enough. But has it? Sandra challenged gently. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been in survival mode for 16 years. That's not healing, Michael. That's just existing, the word struck home. Michael looked at her with something like recognition, as if she had voiced a truth he had been avoiding. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been running so long I've forgotten what it would mean to stop. To actually deal with losing her instead of just distracting myself with wandering. David spoke up thoughtfully. What if your performance today wasn't random? What if some part of you was ready to resurface, to reconnect with the world? You walked in off the street and sat down at a piano in a hotel lobby full of people. That's not the action of someone who truly wants to stay hidden. Michael considered this. I didn't think about it that way. I just saw the piano and felt pulled to it. But maybe you're right. Maybe I'm tired of running. Sandra made a decision. Mr. Sterling, I'm going to offer you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. We have a small suite on the top floor that we use for long-term guests and staff housing. It's empty right now. You're welcome to stay there. No charge for as long as you need. And the piano downstairs is yours to play whenever you want. Not as a performer, not as an obligation. Just as a guest in our hotel who happens to be an extraordinary musician. Michael looked stunned. I can't accept that. It's too much. Actually, it's nothing, Sandra countered. The suite sits empty most of the year anyway. And as for the piano, it's been decoration for too long. It should be played by someone who understands it. Consider it a fair trade. You give our guests the occasional gift of your music, and we give you a place to stay while you figure out what comes next. Why would you do this for me? Michael asked, genuinely confused. Sandra smiled. Because 16 years ago, my mother was dying of cancer. She was in hospice, in a lot of pain. Not really present most days, but the nurses played your recordings in her room. She loved music, had always wanted me to learn piano, but we couldn't afford lessons. When your music played, she would come back somehow, would be alert and peaceful. She died listening to your recording of Clair de Lune. So in a way, you were there for one of the most important moments of my life. This is just me returning the favor. Michael's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his face as 16 years of grief and loneliness and wandering suddenly caught up with him. Sandra moved around the table and hugged him while he cried. This legendary artist who had been carrying impossibly heavy burdens alone for so long. David discreetly turned off his laptop, recognizing that this moment wasn't for public consumption. Some things were too sacred to share, too personal to turn into narrative. He would write his story about Michael Sterling's disappearance and unexpected return, but he would do it with care and respect, focusing on the broader themes of grief and art, and the courage it takes to walk away from everything. Eventually, Michael composed himself, embarrassed but also strangely lighter. "I'll accept your offer," he told Sandra, "but just for a little while until I figure things out. I can't promise I'll stay or that I'll perform regularly or that I won't disappear again." "No promises needed," Sandra assured him. "Just take it one day at a time." 3 months passed after that remarkable afternoon. David Feinstein's article about Michael Sterling had been published in a major music magazine, and as predicted, it caused an international sensation. The story of the missing maestro who had been living as a homeless wanderer, grieving his wife and seeking meaning beyond fame captured global attention. The response was overwhelming. Record labels offered contracts. Concert halls begged him to perform. Talk shows wanted interviews. Movie producers pitched biopics. Michael's agent from the old days, who had never stopped hoping for his return, called Sandra's hotel daily trying to reach him. The lobby became something of a pilgrimage site, with fans and curious tourists stopping by hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary pianist. But Michael Sterling had made his boundaries clear through David's article. He wasn't making a comeback. He wasn't returning to the concert circuit. He would not be recording new albums or doing promotional tours. He was simply a man who played piano because he loved it, and he would continue doing that on his own terms. Sandra had been true to her word. Michael lived in the small suite upstairs, and in exchange he played in the lobby several times a week. But these weren't scheduled performances. He would come down whenever he felt moved to play, sometimes early in the morning when only hotel staff were around, sometimes in the afternoon when the lobby was busy, occasionally late at night when insomniacs and jet-lagged travelers needed something beautiful to cut through their darkness. The hotel had established simple ground rules. No one was allowed to request specific pieces. No one could interrupt him while he played. Photography and recording were permitted, but professional media crews needed advance permission that Michael could veto. The piano area wasn't roped off or made into a spectacle. It remained a casual part of the lobby, and Michael remained a resident who happened to play, not a performer on display. Something remarkable happened in those 3 months. The hotel became known not for celebrity sightings or luxury amenities, but as a place where something authentic and human occurred. People from all walks of life would stop by, not just music enthusiasts, but anyone seeking a moment of beauty in their day. Michael played for doctors taking a break from the hospital across the street. He played for couples on their honeymoon. He played for business travelers stressed about meetings. He played for children who had never heard live classical music before. Professor Mills became a regular visitor, bringing her most talented students to hear Michael play. But she also brought her struggling students, the ones who were thinking of quitting, the ones who had lost their joy for music under the weight of technical perfection. Michael would talk with them after playing, sharing his own journey, encouraging them to find their own relationship with music rather than living up to anyone else's expectations. Emma Rodriguez, the young journalist who had kept her word about the footage, became a friend. She visited weekly, not as a reporter but as someone who had been inspired by Michael's choice to live authentically. They would have coffee and talk about everything except music. He learned about her struggles to make it as a journalist in a changing media landscape. She learned about his years of wandering, the odd jobs and random encounters that had made up his hidden life. David Feinstein came by monthly, always bringing news from the music world that Michael had left behind. Former colleagues sent messages through him. Other musicians who felt trapped by success reached out seeking advice. David was writing a book about the pressure of perfection in the arts, using Michael's story as a central case study, but exploring the broader cultural phenomenon of how we consume and destroy the artists we claim to love. One afternoon in late spring, a young man in his 30s entered the hotel lobby looking nervous and uncertain. He carried a worn violin case and kept glancing around as if afraid someone would throw him out. Sandra, now attuned to recognizing people who had come seeking Michael, approached him gently. "I'm Alex," the man said. "I used to be first violin with the Boston Symphony. I had a breakdown 2 years ago, haven't played since. Someone showed me the article about Mr. Sterling, and I thought maybe he might understand what I'm going through. Sandra led him to the piano, where Michael was sitting and chatting with an elderly couple between pieces. When she explained why Alex was there, Michael's face filled with compassion. He asked Alex to sit beside him on the piano bench and tell his story. Alex spoke haltingly about the pressure, the perfectionism, the way music had gone from joy to torture. He talked about the panic attacks before performances, the insomnia, the way he started drinking to cope. His breakdown had been public and humiliating, covered in classical music publications as a cautionary tale. He had walked away from his career, but unlike Michael, he felt like a failure rather than someone making a brave choice. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression understanding. When Alex finished, Michael simply said, "Play with me." "I can't," Alex protested. "I haven't touched my violin in 2 years. I don't even know if I remember how." "Then it's a perfect time to start remembering," Michael replied. "Not as a performance, not as anything you have to be good at. Just sound. Just notes. Just two people making music because it feels good." Hesitantly, Alex opened his case and lifted out his violin. His hands shook as he rosined the bow and tuned the strings. Michael began playing something simple and slow on the piano, a melody that left space for a violin to join. For a long minute, Alex just stood there frozen with fear. Then he brought the violin to his shoulder and played a single note. It was shaky and uncertain, but it was a start. Michael smiled encouragingly and continued his gentle accompaniment. Gradually, Alex added more notes, finding his way back to an instrument that had once been as natural as breathing. They played together for 20 minutes. Nothing complex or technically demanding. Just simple melodies that flowed back and forth between piano and violin like a conversation between old friends. When they finished, Alex was crying, but they were good tears, healing tears. Several people in the lobby were crying too, moved by witnessing someone take their first steps back from a dark place. "Come back next week," Michael told him. "We'll play again, and the week after that. For as long as it takes for you to remember that music is supposed to bring joy, not pain." Alex nodded, unable to speak, carefully placing his violin back in its case as if it were made of glass and hope. This became a pattern. Word spread quietly through the wounded corners of the music world that there was a piano in a hotel lobby where broken artists could come and be understood. An opera singer who had lost her voice to nodules came and just listened, learning to appreciate music even when she couldn't create it. A composer who hadn't written anything in 5 years came and found inspiration in Michael's improvisations. A music teacher who had forgotten why she loved her work came and remembered. Michael's life had found a new purpose, one he never could have planned or predicted. He wasn't performing for fame or money. He wasn't creating recordings for posterity. He was simply present, showing up day after day, offering the gift of his music and his understanding to whoever needed it. On a warm evening in June, almost 6 months after his unplanned concert had changed everything, Michael sat at the piano alone. The lobby was quiet, most guests out enjoying the long daylight. He began playing something he had composed himself, the first new music he had written since Rebecca's death. It was about grief and healing, about running and returning, about losing everything and finding something unexpected in the emptiness. Sandra heard it from her office and came out to listen. David happened to be in the hotel bar and walked over. Emma was meeting a source and diverted to the lobby. Professor Mills had been giving a private lesson in one of the conference rooms and brought her student. Alex was there with his violin, having returned every week as promised. The elderly couple who had been at the hotel the day Michael first played had changed their vacation plans to stay longer, just to keep hearing him. They all gathered, this unlikely community that had formed around a piano in a hotel lobby, and listened as Michael played his new composition. It wasn't perfect. There were rough edges and sections that needed work, but it was honest and real and filled with hard-won wisdom about what matters in life. When he finished, Michael looked up at the gathered faces and realized he wasn't alone anymore. He had spent 16 years running from connection, from expectation, from the possibility of more loss. But somewhere along the way, while he wasn't paying attention, life had found him anyway. Community had formed, Purpose had emerged. Not the purpose everyone else had wanted for him, but something better. Something that felt like his own. "Thank you," he said simply to everyone present, "for letting me figure out who I am, for not asking me to be anything other than what I am, for understanding that the greatest gift I could give wasn't the perfect performance, but just showing up and being honest about the journey." Outside, the city continued its busy life. Thousands of people rushing toward ambitions and goals and versions of success they had been told to pursue. But inside the Grand Hotel, a small group of people had found something different. They had found a space where brokenness was okay, where success was defined by authenticity rather than achievement, where music existed not to impress but to heal. Michael Sterling, the legendary pianist who had walked away from everything, had finally found his way home, not to the stage or the recording studio or the glittering world of classical music fame, but to something simpler and ultimately more valuable. A community of people who valued him not for what he could do, but for who he was willing to be. And that, he realized, was the greatest performance of his life.